Hello 108 students, Mr. McHugh here with you. Going to do some work here on page 4 with completing the square. Still working hard on section 9.1 and example 5 here at my class notes. Going to go ahead and start that 6-step process and start with 1x squared. Now of course usually you don't see the 1, but I'm overemphasizing it because remember, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, and that's the quadratic in standard form. You got to memorize that. Okay, so if I ask you what the a term is, the a coefficient 1, b coefficient 5, c coefficient -1. Okay, now first step is to ensure that the a coefficient is 1, and we already have that, so we can cruise on to step number 2, which says get it into the right perfect square trinomial form, which means move the constant back over to the right hand side, so add 1 to both sides. Now you've got the x squared and the x term all by themselves equal to 1. Now step 3 talks about completing the square, and that is to take the b, cut it in half, and square it. So this is kind of like side work over here. Okay, you need to do it, but it's not exactly a step that you're going to show through your flow. You're just going to figure out what the squaring factors. This is my terminology. It's take the b, cut it in half, and square it, or 1/2 times b. Sometimes that works. It's the same thing. So here we got 5 divided by 2. Now, oops, I wish it was an even number, but we got to go with it. I like leaving it this way. Take the b, cut it in half, square it, leave it that way. Okay, now if you could simplify it, great, but what you want to do is leave that over here because you need that square root. And so and when you execute it, you get 5 squared is 25 divided by 4. Okay, now what do you do with this squaring factor? Get back to the algebra problem. Start up here, and now you're going to add the squaring factor. Now I would save yourself a step here. I'd teach us on the board. I don't put 25/4 on both sides. I put the 25/4 on the right hand side because that's the result. But on the left hand side, go down to here and write it as 5/2 quantity squared. I make a big deal about this because you need that square root. When you've got a perfect square trinomial, you're taking the square root of the third term. If you leave it in this format, you take inside the parentheses and you drop it down. Take the square root of x squared, which is x, drop the sign, and you're on your way. Now 1 I converted to 4/4 plus 25/4. Remember, you're adding fractions, got to have the same LCD, least common denominator. 4 plus 25 is 29/4. Finally, step 5, you do have this in factored form. You completed a perfect square trinomial. Now you can go ahead and take the square root on both sides. And don't forget the plus or minus when you do that. I always have a tendency to forget that. Put the plus or minus. When you take the square root on both sides, what drops down? The base. X plus 5/2 equals plus or minus square root of 29/4. Okay, now your goal is to isolate the x variable. So we minus 5/2 on both sides of the equations, and we come down to -5/2 plus or minus the square root of 29/2. Okay, and one little detail, fortunately, MyMathLab likes everything under one common denominator, so you've got halves in the denominator. So keep the denominator and say -5 plus or minus the square root of 29. Okay, now that's the answer you're going to go with, except that you've got to break this up and make it 2 separate answers, and I've done this before. So it's -5 plus the square root of 29 divided by 2, comma, -5 minus 29 square root of 29 divided by 2. Make sure you see there's 2 separate answers there. Okay, now this example here, number 6 in my notes, is I just double checked, it's actually number 8 in the new book, and this is on page 501. So page 501, this is example number 8. Going to go through this one here. The big thing to start it off with is, you notice the a term is a 2. You're supposed to be a 1. How do you get a 1 there? Divide by whatever that a coefficient is. If it's a 2, divide everything by 2. So divide by 2, divide by 2, divide by 2, leaving you x squared minus 2x minus 5/2 equals 0. Okay, now you're supposed to leave it with just the x squared and the x on the left hand side, so add 5/2 to both sides. that leaving you a 0 over here and 5 halves on the right hand side. Now you got to complete the square, step number 4. Now remember, you can follow the step numbers, go back to the previous page like I mentioned, and follow the details. So what is b? It's -2. Cut it in half and square it. So -2 divided by 2 is -1. Squared is still a 1, and so we're going to add 1 to both sides. Okay, that you got to maintain balance. So whatever completing the square is, add it to both sides. But again, use the forms that I talked about. You want to keep it in parentheses on the left-hand side. Okay, so with that said, the square root of 1 is 1. Drop down the sign, drop down the square root of x squared, which is x. Square that quantity, x minus 1 quantity squared equals, now be careful with the arithmetic here, 5 halves plus 1, that would be the same as 1 can be written as 2 over 2. Got to have LCDs in the denominator, so 5 plus 2 is 7 halves. Okay, now here's the big step. Take the square root on both sides. Take the square root on both sides. You know the drill. What drops down is the base. X minus 1 drops down. You got plus or minus 7 divided by the square root of 2. Now, here's where I really would ask you guys. I ran out of room here and I'm getting a little sloppy. Apologize about that. Go on page 501 right here. And I want you to look on the right hand side in blue and follow these steps here. I'm running out of room here. You're not done with this answer. You can't have a radical in the denominator. Okay, so what I have here is 1 plus or minus the square root of 7 divided by the square root of 2. Okay, now if you look in the book here, you've got to take 7 over the square root of 2 and rationalize. Remember that back? So we don't care for radicals in the denominator, so stack them, whatever the denominator is. So square root of 2 times the square root of 2 is the square root of 4. You multiply them. Square root of 4 is 2. Hopefully you guys are remembering all that good stuff. 2 times 7 is 14, and that's what they want. Okay, so final answer to this problem is not 1 plus or minus square root of 7 divided by 2. It is square root of 14 divided by 2. Okay, so check that out for little details just in case that got a little hairy for you, but you cannot have radicals down in the denominator. Okay, Mr. McHugh, we have finished page 4. We got one more to do. Page 5 coming up, so I'll see you then to wrap up this section. Okay, bye.